And that's it. All right. So again, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with today's Lunch and Learn with Sera Hartman from Northwest Agriculture Business Center. And Sera's going to be talking about food safety planning and sharing a really good tool with us. And as always, just please, this is casual. Please feel free to show yourselves, even if you're eating lunch. And please put questions that you have in the chat. And there will be plenty of time for Q&A. I know Sera's planning to have time for questions while she's talking as well, but just use the chat. We'll get your questions answered before this time is over, or if we don't, you can write them in. We'll get back to you. We will have a Q&A sheet for this session that will also be on our website, www.fsp.org. And that's where you can find the recordings, the presentation slides, and Q&As all written up for all our Lunch and Learns. So use that website. Okay, let's get started, Sera, with I'm going to just hand it over to you to finish introducing yourself and share your info. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know food safety planning isn't the most sexy topic in the world, but we're going to try to have a little bit of fun today. And as Marty mentioned, we're going to do a little Q&A during the presentation. I'm going to be asking you some questions about the food safety plan. And then if you've got any additional questions, then we'll hold those to the end so that we can batch all that together. So yes, I'm a project manager with NABC, the Northwest Agriculture Business Center. That's why we shorten it to NABC. That's an awful long name. I'm also a PCQI. Well, what's that? That's a preventative controls qualified individual. It's a mouthful. So what does that mean? That's a person who's been trained in writing food safety plans. There surely is a shorter way of saying it, but hey, there it is. So I'm a PCQI, among other things. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to have, as I said, a little bit of fun and do a light introduction on food safety plans. This food safety plan template is for producers. This would be for vegetable producers, I should say, to be more specific. We're not doing necessarily looking at fruits, but that could probably be included in here. There are other templates that I'm developing, like for food hubs, that would be a little more involved and get more into process because they're doing more transport and handling of produce. They've got a little bit of a different system and probably higher traffic coming into their warehouse. But this one today, this is just the very basic, just a pre-post harvest food safety plan. So what is a food safety plan? The whole idea of a food safety plan is try to mitigate the risk to the public from contaminants entering into the food chain. So the food safety plan is how you're doing that. You're laying out how do you keep allergens from being introduced? How do you keep gravel out of your lettuce? That kind of thing. And there's a more specific explanation of it. And I got this, thank you, from Hong Kong, an overview of the steps taken to reduce the risk of food safety problems such as contamination with foreign objects, diseases, toxins, and etc. Basically, anticipate, mitigate. It's based on HACCP principles. Okay, so what's HACCP? I have to read this to make sure I got all the letters in here. HACCP, HACCP. That stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. Again, a million. Basically, doing an analysis, thinking about what you're doing, writing it down. That's all it is. It's just analysis.
Hey, Sera.
So,
Sera,
yes.
did you want to share any of the images that you're looking at yet? Or when you do, share your screen. And I also am interrupting you to ask if you're not talking, please mute yourself until you want to talk. Thank you.
That's a very good point. Yeah, sometimes we'll we'll hear people's phones coughs and stuff. And no, I haven't started sharing my screen yet. So, but thank you, Marty.
Okay.
We're still having a little bit of a chat here, the preamble. But that is a lovely segue because I'm about to share my screen now. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the template, and I'm going to just guide you through the different sections that I developed for that. And we'll ask a few questions at each section and see if you could contribute towards a better understanding. And there we go. That is the food safety plan. It is a very rough description of the different types of things that you might include in a food safety plan. This is very, very basic, and it's intended to simply get you a rough draft of the food safety plan. It's not the full-blown version, and Melissa knows this well. We've had this conversation. You can get very elaborate, and you can have charts and graphs and whatever. But for this particular template, this is just to create a rough draft. And you'll see here up at the top, we'll start with who reviewed this plan? Well, why would that be important, do you think? Would anyone have an answer as to why you think it would be important to include the name of the reviewer? Going once, going twice? Well, you'd want to know who was responsible for developing this plan, who wrote down all those processes, and who would you go to if you had more questions? The next thing here, and these are kind of minor, but they're kind of important. When was it updated and reviewed? Why might that be important? Well, you'd want to know which version are you looking at? Has there been a change since you've originally created this plan? Maybe you created it a year ago, and maybe your processes have changed. Maybe you have different roles and responsibilities. Maybe you're using different chemicals in your operation. So you'd want to know when's the last version that was created of this food safety plan to make sure there's no confusion. Then we're going to go on to business information here. Physical address or addresses. So how many of you are farming, and how many of you, and I'm looking at you, Jesselyn, because I know the answer to this, have multiple sites for your growing activities? You would want to probably say, hey, where are these processes taking place? And if you've got different processes at different locations where you do your work, you may want to include those different processes as you go through this plan to make sure that whoever's reading this is understanding exactly what you're referring to. So city, zip, obviously. Primary farm contact email address. Well, some of you may be the head cook and bottle washer and do it all, but some of you may have employees, so you'd want to know who is the primary contact for the farm. If there's an issue with food safety, if there's a question about the food safety plan, policies, that kind of thing, you'd want to know how to get a hold of that individual. And the phone and fax. If anyone does anyone do fax anymore? I don't know. But it's still a thing in some places of the world, so we like to include that. And down here, the person who's responsible for the food safety. So this would be the person who is actually making sure the food safety activities are being accomplished. And the person who's noting down what's being measured, what's being tracked. Who would you go to with questions? You want to include that person, not just the primary farm contact person for like the policy and the administration, but is there a different person who's actually the person to go to about food safety? And by the way, do we all understand what food safety really means? I mean, there's a whole lot of things that could be encompassed in that. Again, it's just trying to preserve the integrity of the food that's going off of the farm. That could be all manner of things, and we'll get into this. Very basic stuff here still. Product list. This is where you'd want to include everything that you're growing. You want to make sure that, you may have different processes for different products. You may have a different process and a different way to protect lettuces versus maybe something that's in a greenhouse. You've got something that's covered from overflying birds. What happens with birds that fly over? Material, shall we say, can drop onto the products. So the greenhouse products would be protected from snow geese overhead versus maybe something in the field. And some products out in the field may have row cover on them. So you might want to note that what your products are, because it could be treated differently. Now, why would you have the intended market? Does anyone have any idea why you would include that in a food safety plan? I see Emily's nodding.
You pack them differently?
Boom, there you go. That will be
have
one.
Different requirements. Like one of my wholesale markets is listed on my insurance. Other ones don't require that. So
that's it. Bang, you've got it. Exactly. And some will require gaps, some will require different levels, some require different certifications. So this is just another way of making sure you're capturing all that information. Well done. Okay, so you may have noticed, by the way, speaking of covered production, you're going to see a few shots of my place today. In my virtual background here, you'll see some covered hoop rows. That's when they looked all nice and clean before the remake got shredded. But that's a little shot of my farm back there. And I am now going to treat you to pea planting. All right. So now we are going to head on into the good part here. Harvest and handling. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts here. We're going to share this back again. So here we've got, how do you treat that product that you are growing? First off, I've thrown in here lettuce. Lettuce is a good one to pick one. Have we had problems with lettuce in the recent past? Perhaps you all remember E. coli. That was fun. That created a lot of problems and a lot of risk mitigation scrambling on the part of various producers when E. coli was discovered out there. And then it's not just the producer, it's all the way up the stream. So this is another reason why we take a close look at this. So I just threw in here a process for lettuce. This is how we cut it. Maybe you use a lettuce knife. Use a lettuce knife. Do you use the lettuce knife on multiple heads? Maybe you do. Might you dip that lettuce knife in sanitizer after so many heads of lettuce? There might be some things that this is a way of kind of thinking through that process, doing that HACCP, that analysis piece, and doing this with some intention. Then you put it into a bin. The bin is sanitized. That's something to think about. Here we go. There's the knives being sanitized 4 times a day. This is all just an example. Do not take this as the way to harvest lettuce. This is just something to get you going here. Bins are removed for the field. How often? And maybe you'd want to not wait till you harvest all your lettuce if you have a whole field. Is it a hot day? Is there a reason why you might want to take the bins off of the field more often? Those are some things to think through. Then how do you treat it after you've brought it into your packing shed? Well, here I've said that Welsh Creek Farm washes it under running water for 2 to 5 minutes and spins it dry for a certain 2 to 4 minutes, then packs it in a new or a clean reused wax box with a fresh plastic liner and stores it in a cooler of a specific degrees. These are all things you'll want to note, because that also informs the things you might want to measure and track to make sure that everything actually is 34 degrees. You might even want to check your sanitizer, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Can anyone think of maybe some other processes that might be involved in the produce that you grow? Going once, going twice?
If you're gonna band it, if you're gonna use any type of packaging or banding tags.
Yes, yes, exactly. And make sure, so are those clean, fresh bands? They're not, are they reused? If they're reused, were they sanitized? What happens if a band drops on the floor? What do you do with that band? You know, these are some things that you might want to think about as far as correcting processes, which we'll get into later, but it starts the process of thinking through where could that contamination, how are you going to defend that food? All righty here, post-harvest details. Now here's one that would apply to food hubs, but also perhaps to packing sheds. Might you have a sanitizing boot watch for your staff before you enter the packing area, so you're not trotting in contaminants from walking through the parking lot, or you've just gone off to empty the garbage over by, you know, the bin, and before you go into the packing shed, would this be something that you would want to maybe make sure those you've removed as much contamination from the bottom of your boots before you go into your solid floor packing area? Does anyone actually have a solid floor packing area? If you're a small producer, it's going to be gravel under an overhead or something like that. But hey, these are, again, this is some food for thought moments. And again, this might be where you'd say, oh, well, some produce gets stored at this temperature. Some produce gets stored at this other temperature. That makes it a lot of fun. That's where you want to start maybe doing some farm planning too. It's like, oh, maybe at this time of year, I want to grow everything that all needs to be treated in the same way, so I don't have to have multiple coolers going on, or I can batch my produce and handle food safety as group of produce. So that might be something to think of, as long as you're not getting cross-contamination, allergens, and things like that. All righty, so we are going to move down to monitoring and correction. Like I said, when things go wrong, what might you do? Walk-in cooler temperature. So we set it. Do we set it and forget it? Nope. We want to make sure there. Yep, I see some acknowledgement there. The temperature of the cooler is checked twice a day to make sure that it's still the temperature it's supposed to be, because if there's a failure, you'd want to know that, because that could place your produce at risk. That's where you'd want to research the parameters. If my cooler has been off, I don't know how long, because you don't know how long that cooler's been bad, right? It could have gone off last night. When's the last time you checked it? Oh gosh, oh, here it is on the log. Okay, John checked it at such and such a time. So he just checked it a couple hours ago, and it was fine. So trusting that John actually did do it and did note that down, and that would be a training moment. The records are saying, oh, it's only been off for a maximum of 2 hours. The produce is probably still good. I'm checking the temperature inside. I'm noting that the temperature is now just a degree off of where it was, because we got a really good cooler and it's not losing temperature, so we're still good. So we're going to think about that. We're going to note that if something goes wrong. But what if the cooler had been off for 24 hours? What would be your process? What's your protocols then? How would you treat that produce? What temperature is it reading now? Is it still safe to sell, or do you need to cull that produce because it is now outside of the safe range? And according to the research that you've done, if it's out of the safe range, then you have to pull it at a certain point. So these are, again, thinking through your processes. You can really make yourself crazy, but this is a way to kind of do it with real intention. And here you see there's the corrections there, and there is the range of tolerance, 3 degrees of target. And then
hey, Sarah,
what you're going to do.
I don't know if you saw, if you wanted to take questions during, but there is a question in the chat. Do you want to hold it, or did you want to?
If it's a question about these things, we could certainly do that. Otherwise, I'm going to be asking questions as we go through this, and then we can hold the questions to the end. So I'll leave. Is this something that you think we'd want to stop for and answer now?
I kind of think that's why I did. I was thinking we would wait, but then this one did seem really pertinent to this particular section. And it is from Jillian, I believe, or Gillian. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. So sorry.
Oh, and yes, please tell us how to pronounce your name correctly.
Okay, cool. Jillian. I grow more than 80 types of vegetables and herbs for 3 to 4 different types of markets. And I can imagine a document set up this way being so long, it's basically unusable by staff. I'm curious how strict the by vegetable type is for a food safety plan. There are a lot of things that are standard. Harvest totes cannot be on the ground but stacked. Bins for washed produce do not touch ground. All harvest knives are sanitized before use and not set on ground, etc. For any usage and not vegetable specific.
That's a good, thorough, long, specific question. So well done on that. As I said, batching is going to be your friend here. Do things in groups. You may want to note down maybe how can you group those produce items into your list. And remember too, a food safety plan is not a specific template. This is just one example of the way to do a food safety plan. There's no standard way because one size fits you. Every operation is different from every other operation. So you do what works best. And I would recommend if you can batch the qualities, the parameters for different crops. Maybe it's brassicas. Maybe all your brassicas get treated the same way. They all have the same temperature, or they all follow the same protocols. Wherever possible, avoid too much specificity in it. And this isn't something that you're going to be uploading to some government website. This is a tool for you to help you and your staff keep control of 80 different varieties and making sure that things are being done properly. So hopefully that answers your question. This is your tool for your use. So you figure out how to best work that for you. All righty. So we are going to go back to this monster. The second item on here is sanitation dip. Okay. So as I said, you may want to check their sanitation. What are you going to check it for? Your concentration. Is it still good? After you have dipped a certain number of items in there that has already been rinsed, and now you're doing that final sanitation dip, might that produce bring in some water that's diluting that sanitation? So you'll want to figure out how often or how many items go through some measure, at which point you're going to retest the concentration of your sanitation dip and make sure that it's still doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? And here you'll see that Welsh Creek Farm is going to be testing after every 5th batch. Or as needed by a turbidity test. Does anyone know what turbidity is? There's our star farmer down there nodding, I see. Okay, hey, would you like to tell the folks what turbidity is? Do you want to define it? Am I putting you on the hot seat?
I mean, I know it from back when I was in school for environmental studies. So we used it to check like suspended particles in water. I'm curious, like we used it with a little white and black disc that we would sink down for, and I've done something similar with wash water, but I'm not sure how you would use that for something that's not visibly dark, like a sanitation concentrate. So curious to see how that would look.
Well done. And that's exactly right. And I too have an environmental sciences degree. So, hey, that's wonderful. So you understand turbidity. And yes, it's basically the amount of solutes, the particles that it's in the water. Is it muddy? Basically, that's where we're going. Is it too muddy to work? And some sanitation, I believe, comes with its own turbidity strips, and so it's got like the color on there, and you just dip it and say, "Oh my goodness!" In this amount of water, from in this volume, they've got different ways of measuring it. Does it look the same color as it does when it's clean, or is it a filthy mess now and maybe isn't really doing the job anymore? So it really depends on the sanitizer and the test and stuff. It's sort of, it's a bit broad in here because everything is different from everything else, but that's basically what you're looking at. Is it filthy? Right. So question time. Can anyone identify the seeds in my background? Look at those big fellows. Anyone? Sugar snap peas. That's my sugar snap peas. So moving along now. Personnel training, as I alluded to earlier. So you will hopefully have some help. Maybe not starting out. Maybe they're not of age when they're first starting to help you. Maybe you've just got little ones who are helping you in your flower fields. But at some point, you might actually have adults that you need to train. And you're going to want to keep a record of the training that they receive so you can make sure that everyone knows how things are done and how you do things. So you want to teach them not just your policy, but certain food safety rules. You want to teach them, say, hand washing after using the restroom. And how often do you sanitize those knives that you're cutting your lettuce heads with? And there might be some other things. As it says here, someone is going to be mixing those sanitizers. Maybe there's going to be some general safety, worker safety. Now, worker safety, that isn't necessarily a food safety thing, but somewhere you're going to want to have a personnel training log. It could be in the training log book, it could be somewhere else, and then maybe keep a copy saying so-and-so completed X training on this date and keep that in personnel files. And that way, if there's an issue, you can go back to it. Or if you have a general log saying, oh gosh, we haven't trained anybody in how to use a fire extinguisher in 2 years, maybe we need to do that because we've got some new staff. This is just another way of kind of controlling chaos and making sure that everyone is on the same page and has an understanding. Like, oh, if you've got a cut on your finger, you need to cover that up if you're handling raw produce, right? You don't want blood contaminants on your lettuce. I'm always picking on the lettuce. Poor lettuce. All righty then. Cleaning and sanitation. This is where you want to maybe think about your policies. How do you envision people interacting with your farm? Hygiene policies for visitors as well as staff. I just threw it, and believe me, I'm going to share this template out to everybody. I didn't have time to put it up into Google Docs for this particular experience, but I'm going to share this out to anyone who registered for this event today so that you can go through and see some of these. Really just, it's food for thought. This is, again, there is no hard and fast way to do this, but I cherry picked the things that I thought would be the most thought-provoking, the most topical for most farms. And we don't need to go through this list here, but it's just think through, how are you going to deal with visitors on your farm? They could be bringing contaminants in from the outside. Maybe they got their little pocket dog with them. Do you want that pocket dog out in your fields? Do you want dogs in your fields at all? How are you going to handle animals that are not just from the visitors, not just snow geese flying overhead, but maybe the farm dog? Should the farm dog be running around maybe peeing on those lettuces? Probably not. That's a very bad idea. So you're going to have to think about fencing. You're going to have to think about leash requirements, and kind of go through this process and identify those moments where you want to have a policy in place for that, so that if you need something, say, and if a staff member has to challenge a visitor, you want to have some rules written down for that individual, so I can say, oh, no, don't yell at me. It's in the rules. That gives your staff something to approach people with, and kind of helps them with that moment if they have to challenge somebody. All righty then. We're going to move ahead now and introduce you to this crop. Can anyone identify what's growing behind my head under my hoop house? What do you think? Does anyone recognize that?
Peppers.
Yay! Well done. That's my pepper crop from a couple of years ago. Good job. All righty, here's a few more of those suggested policies, things to think about. What happens if a worker is feeling sick? Do you want them to maybe stay home? Has that been an issue in the last few years? Has there been something highly transmissible? Maybe you don't want them to come to work and spread the love. So again, that's one of those policies you want to think about. Here's that note about covering wounds with bandages and such. These are just some ideas. You'll probably have your own. Moving on to cleaning plan. So at the end of the day, maybe you've got mud everywhere, you've got handprints all over everything, you've had a U-pick operation going on, you've had the public into the restrooms. You're going to want to take a moment and maybe deal with all of that and reset the stage for the next experience. So what is your protocols for the restrooms? Having a restroom is essential if you have employees. It's part of your food safety plan and part of just worker and staff safety and health. And so you're going to want to make sure that you've got a system for making sure that there is soap in the dispensers, that you do have single-use towels. When's the last time it was checked? How often it's checked? Who's responsible for that? You want to have a clipboard, some way of monitoring that. Again, just like checking the temperature of your cooler, when's the last time this was done? If you've got it noted, you've got the date and the time noted. If it happens more than once a day, you'll want to have a time on there. And then who did that? So if something didn't go quite right and you want to maybe hand someone production out and say, you need to do it this way, you want to know who that person was, right? This is where you're going to think through that process and maybe start developing those checklists for yourself. I'm going to be developing template checklists and monitoring forms as a companion to this template food safety plan. And, drop a note to me if you're interested in having something that you can then modify to suit your tastes. Then certainly drop me a line. Be very happy to share those out when they get developed. Then there's the packing line belt. You've had raw produce all over your packing belt all day. What are you going to do with that? Well, this is what Welsh Creek Farm. I don't have any of this stuff, by the way. Welsh Creek Farm is my operation, but it's about the size of a postage stamp. So I just made up these wonderful ideas, and maybe nobody has a belt. Maybe everybody's just got like a stainless steel table, they do stuff. That's fine. As I said, this is really just the ideas that you can bounce from. So if you had a belt or even a table, how would you scrub it? Maybe with Barkeeper's Friend. That's something that we used a lot in the mobile poultry processing unit. And so this would be a good time to ask, does anybody know the steps for cleaning and sanitizing? Anyone?
Clean, then sanitize.
Yes.
Sanitize something that has dirt on it.
Clean, rinse, and then sanitize. Yeah, basically that's it. And then sanitization is the last step because then you don't want to vitiate it with anything else, but that's exactly right. Okay, sanitizer plan. So this is where you're going to get into the nitty gritty and geek on those sanitizers. What do you use? So the last time you wrote this version of the plan, you were using what chemical? That's why you want to review these plans about once a year to make sure that everything is still the way it was when you did this. You may have changed to a different sanitizer. Maybe it's got different protocols. Maybe it's used on different things. You want to say, where do you use that chemical? Because some things you want to use on that lettuce, that poor beleaguered lettuce. Some things are only for use on cleaning the bathroom. So you want to make sure that you're very clear, especially if you've got staff that needs to be trained. What chemical where? You might even want to take some physical steps in your physical operation that kind of you bounce off this plan into the physical universe and say, oh, you know what? I think it just makes sense to kind of idiot-proof my operation. If I keep the chemicals that belong in the bath to clean the bathroom in the bathroom, and I keep the things that need to be used to sanitize the produce over by the produce to make sure they don't commingle. But you also want to have it noted down right here in your food safety plan so everybody's on the same page. What to use, where is it used, how do you test the strength on it, who's responsible, how often do you do it, and anything else that you think is pertinent to your operation. All righty, let's give our eyes a break from that very white piece of paper there. And we're going to say, hey, what's my background now? Can anyone guess what this might be? It's a little bit tricky here. You probably won't guess specifically. I'll give you a hint. It's a brassica. I think it's a brassica. Okay, can anyone tell me if cauliflower is a brassica?
Yes.
Hey! Well done. All right. Doing good on time here? Okay. So hazard management. We're going to be looking here at the different types of hazards. All right, so you can read it on the screen here. What are the 3 types of hazards? You can have biological, which is usually abbreviated in B in food safety plans, just so that you can see things more quickly and clearly. Chemical, or C. Physical, or P. What's interesting about chemical? Food allergens are considered to be a chemical hazard, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it, but also pesticides, drug residues, natural toxins. What might be a natural toxin? Something that arises, that's being given off by little bugly-boos, maybe some viruses, some different types of critters in the environment, some other natural toxins, maybe that arise from decomposition. And then there might be unapproved food or color additives. Something that doesn't belong in there might have gotten in. Physical, and this is where I was alluding to before, there could be things that are hazards that aren't even from your fields. It could be in the packing shed. Do you have a bare light bulb hanging over your packing belt? Could that glass break? Could there be metal shavings from the gears of the belt that enter into the food?
Hey,
Anywhere
Dima.
that something could enter. Oh, please go ahead. Hello? Oh, we had someone there for a second. So go ahead and give it a good think. This is where you want to have to get really down into the weeds. You can geek on this stuff all day long. Here's some other things that could possibly go wrong. Rodents. Do you have rat bait present? You're going to want to note that somewhere, maybe up in the chemicals used and where it's used. Do you have rat bait within X number of feet of your packing area? You want to think about the placement there. Make sure you don't get rat poison into your food. And here's where you come up with phyto out in the field, or deer. You could have deer droppings out in your crops. And you're going to want to think about how are you going to, as much as possible, reduce the risk. We don't talk about preventing risk. We talk about reducing risk. Nothing's 100%. But this food safety plan, the point of this experience is to reduce the risk as much as possible. If something goes terribly wrong, well, that's another moment, and that's going to be your recall plan. That's going to be the emergency plan. What happens? And that would be something else that you'd want to develop and think through. What happens when things go badly south? What kind of insurance do you have? What's the step one when you've identified a problem? And that would be a discussion for another day. But in looking through these items on the food safety plan, it kind of sets you up for thinking the what if scenarios. Well, that was interesting. All righty. What have we got in my background, people?
Scallions or green onions, or yeah, green onions.
It's an allium.
Oh, leeks. Are they big?
Garlic.
Oh, garlic.
Yeah. Well done. Okay. Q&A time. Hit me, folks. Do you have any additional questions at this time?
Just what was that? But hi, Sarah.
Yeah.
Everyone was muted.
I commentary on the presentation.
It sounded like it was like piped in. I'm such a child. I think it's so funny. But if nobody,
my child with me, and she's thinking that she's like, this is a great talk.
Masha, hey.
Hey.
Spoken to you forever. Hello. I know you're going to be at the class on Friday. Hi.
Yeah, I'm with my 9-year-old, and she's like, "Oh, this is awesome." I'm like, "This is no. This is not."
I agree with your 9-year-old.
Oh, we're all 9 every so often, aren't we?
So, Sarah, there was a question that was about what are approved sanitizers these days for that are not bleach, affordable, biodegradable, and salmon safe. And Jillian offered up that Sanidate is one of those, and that there's a second product which sounds like it's very concentrated and a little hard to use, but it's for direct contact with food. So we caught that, and they can be ordered from Arbico Organics. Everybody, this is in the chat. If you want to gather that information, it will also be in the Q&A sheet. But I just wanted to ask you, Sarah, if you had anything to add on that question about sanitizers.
Peracetic acid would be the fun term for that. And I believe I actually have that spelled out in the food safety plan template somewhere, so that if you're looking for it. So the Sanidate, I believe, is peracetic acid. I think that's maybe the brand name for that, but it doesn't have to be that particular brand.
With some sort of a hydrogen peroxide type derivative.
So and like, that's the list in the document that I linked to, which we'll put on the list of resources too. That it named, it also named chlorine materials, but it named basically hydrogen peroxide. Are we getting like hacked or something?
MR, if you're on here, can you mute, please?
No, he is muted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's muted. Everybody, he was unmuted for a while, but no, he's been muted.
It's not me.
I know. I believe it.
Brassicas. It's not me either. That's what happens when you eat too many brassicas.
Wasn't me.
I know it wasn't. You were muted. I saw you were unmuted.
Sorry, that's hysterical.
I know. Whatever.
Commentary. Well, I said we'd have some fun today, and people are definitely contributing to that.
This is gonna, hopefully this will be our most hits we get on YouTube for our for other reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, it listed peracetic acid, hydrogen peroxide. It had a few, and it gets into like which ones are better for organic. So that's all tracking.
Great. Anything else you want to add on on that, Sera?
That was real. I looked through the list of all the different types of things from, because I'm a micro operation. I'm not going to be getting like, gallons and drums of materials. And that's what I found myself for the smaller scale producer, and really didn't find anything else other than just, and it's like bleach or it's Sanidate, and that was pretty much what I found in combing the internet. And I'd love to know if there's anything else that anyone has come across.
Okay, so if anybody has anything about that to add, please chime in. And I will just also ask this next question that Jillian raised about.
Wait, before you do that, can I just tag something on that's connected to the sanitizing and washing, please?
Please.
I'd be curious if we don't have like a shed with its own drain system. So our big concern has been like making sure that any runoff from our wash station is environmentally safe. So for washing, not the sanitizing part, we've been using Dr. Brommer's soap, which is like the closest we can find for a biodegradable soap, and we rinse it off, but it's not technically like a food safe soap. So I was curious if anyone has a better option for like the wash part of the process if all your wastewater is getting dumped like right on the earth.
I know that there are some produce washes of various types. It's just
for
some
like
of them you have to buy
equipment.
huge quantities.
So if I have to scrub down and like soap up a bin to get stuff off before I sanitize it, like my wash tank, just kind of stuff like that, bins get gross.
Yeah. Interestingly, I found that plants love dish soap, and soapy water is one of those very, homebrew kinds of remedies for pests that you spray on your plants, just regular old soapy water. So I'm kind of wondering if just, now, of course, it needs to be technically a food safe soap, but I'm thinking that I wouldn't be super worried about the soap that you're using or the sanitizers that you use. I mean, if it's safe for food consumption, I think that it's probably safe for the environment.
I mean, bleach is safe for food surfaces, but I wouldn't want to be dumping a bunch of it on the ground. So I don't know.
True.
Anyways, I've had trouble finding like environmentally safe soap options.
I'll chime in on something. I had a conversation with a girlfriend of mine. Her husband's in the oil industry, and they actually rely on Dawn because they does cut the grease and oil and all of that, but it also is because it's not affecting the land. And so it might be looking into that further.
And when I was scrubbing oily birds about 1 million years ago over on the coast, thanks to the Exxon spill, we used Dawn dish soap, just like they advertise, and safe enough for duckies. But I'm not sure from a regulatory standpoint if there is an issue with using it on food. So that would be a very interesting question to research and see, even though there's going to be a rinse that follows that wash. I mean, if you're washing the produce, it's one thing, and then there's washing the equipment, which is another thing. So there's lots of things that are safe to use on the equipment. I don't know that I think that you'd want to use different things on the produce itself. So I think probably on the produce, it's just spray it down with water real well and then do a sanitizing dip if you feel so moved. But on the equipment itself, there's a wide range of things that you can use that are fine for the environment, like the Dawn. And I understand Barkeeper's Friend is actually pretty mild. By the way, what have I got in my background now? Anyone recognize those lovelies?
Tomatoes.
Yay! Well done. All right, next question.
Yeah, I had a question um on all my processing facilities around seafood. Um I usually put a fake but very official looking sign on the door that says no visitors, no admittance, Marsec levels, you know, level 8. Um, you know, you will be prosecuted by the federal government if you pass inside this facility, because I want no visitors in a seafood plant. I don't want to end up on Bill Marler's Food Safety News. And listeria is such an incredible problem
Yes.
with marine proteins and processing. But what any visitors that come in that are approved, I make them put on a full-on Tyvek suit, um, face mask, hair mask, and gloves. and and I also have a shoe and boot dip, but I don't let anybody in the plant that isn't wearing boots. They got to be wearing some sort of rubber boots, and I make them dip on the way in. And then I have a requirement for whoever's my manager on the floor has to check and replenish the boot dip um, several times during a processing shift. Um, Another thing that I have is garbage cans and garbage, and anybody that goes out to dumpster. Um, if they touch garbage, if they even touch a garbage can inside the processing floor, they have to change their gloves, go wash their hands, put on new gloves. If they go outside and do the garbage, I require the same thing. It's insane in processing plants, also restaurant kitchens, how many times you'll see people touch the garbage can, and return right back to processing food. Um, it's insane. It happens all day long. Every restaurant I go in, I can see those touches happening instantly within like 5 minutes. Um, so that's a terrible problem, and I always got to be telling people no touches, on the garbage, and we got to protect ourselves. But I work in a much more volatile situation than most of you doing with marine proteins. But with E. coli and all the E. coli recalls with produce, these and fruit these days, I think everybody just has to be maximally responsible. You get infected, you end up in the news, it's over. You're done. You might as well go get a new job, learn how to code or learn how to be an AI slave, because your day is done. So yeah, just
Johnny,
throwing
did
it out
you
there.
have,
Be careful, everybody.
yeah,
Don't become a news item.
thanks for all that good advice. And I was just wondering if you had written that you had some questions. Did you want to ask one? We also have a Dasha and then another couple questions in the chat we want to get to, and we only have 5 minutes left. So did you have a question you wanted to throw in there?
We're gonna need some help down the road. So um I haven't worked in Washington State for almost 15 years. So I've been up in Alaska and I'm back. But I worked co-packers, I worked seafood and meat retail, I worked restaurant, I worked fish processing. I have a thermal certificate for retort canneries. So I need some help on what's all required in Washington State when I write a new HACCP plan. Do I need to go to better process school in Washington State to be certified for all this? I got a tons of questions on all that stuff that will be coming up. But
okay, why don't you get a hold of me? Reach out to me after the presentation and we'll connect. And then when you're ready to ask those questions, if you need some help researching answers, yeah, let's work on that. Probably after the first of the year, whenever it is that you're spinning up to get the new HACCP plan ready.
Yeah, thank you. Because we're developing micro canneries, so I've got a ton of questions on what I can do and can't do in Washington State, what's all required. So thank you.
I just
Great. Yeah, no problem, Johnny.
Email in the chat, and it will also be on the Q&A sheet. And I wanted to thank Jules for posting in a resource for figuring out rates of sanitizers. That's so great. And I also just wanted to ask another question that was posted in here. Do you know anyone, Sarah, who has used the template successfully when applying to sell through the Puget Sound Food Hub?
This template is actually brand new, and it's really, it's not a full-blown plan, excuse me. It's really a guide. You develop a plan of your own based on some of these questions. And this is just, again, these are food for thought. This isn't necessarily a fill in the blank and you'll end up with a completed food safety plan. You've got to put a lot of yourself into it because every operation is so different. So no, it actually is, it's not really quite built for that. But if you need some help after using the template and answering those questions and formulating it into a food safety plan, I'd be more than happy to help.
Thanks, Sarah. And Adasha, I saw that your hand was up a minute ago. Did you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I didn't see the template, and I'm honestly driving. But I know some of the questions and some of the concerns that had came up that y'all were talking about. We had to develop a biosecurity, plan for the facility, whether in our urban farm or our rural farm, so that when you're talking about like the cross-contamination and the boots, and we have poultry and then hydroponic lettuce. So we make sure that those barriers and stuff aren't crossed. So is that not covered or required? I think we kind of went all out working with Virginia Tech on their food safety protocols for hydroponics when we incorporated it, but is it not included biosecurity plans in your in food safety?
Oh, absolutely. It's whatever works for your operation. This is the template questions that I came up with are just very, very basic as a starter, but absolutely. And if you've got livestock or poultry on the same farm, then that's going to be another layer of protection that you're going to want to address. And you'll get those questions answered this Friday at the Produce Safety Alliance class, which is an excellent course to take if you have the opportunity. And it gets very deep into all these different topics that I'm just barely touching on today, and will help set you up even better as you develop your food safety plan. So keep your eyes open for other PSA training opportunities if you really want to geek out on biosecurity.
Sarah, can you just say again this Friday the name of the course and how to register for that?
I'm afraid that course is full.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But it's the Produce Safety Alliance, and it's the training offered through Cornell. And they do pop up from time to time. I know that WSU offers courses as well as NABC from time to time. And that's what you want to just kind of keep your eyes open for if you have an opportunity to take a Produce Safety Alliance course known as a PSA course. And it will give you a much more in-depth view into food safety and post-harvest. I see that we are at time.
Yes. And we captured your questions. That there was one about strategies for dealing with birds over produce. We will try to cover some responses to that in the Q&A sheet that we will post on the website. I'll put it's just www.fsp.org, Western Washington Food Systems Partnership.org. I'm putting it in the chat there. And so look at the Lunch and Learn resources on there. And thank you so much, Sarah, for doing this session. It was obviously very helpful for people, and we appreciate your expertise. And thank you all for being here. We will be having all future Lunch and Learns on the second Thursday of the month, same time, 12 to 1. There'll be second Thursdays starting in January. So you can mark your calendars for that and watch for some promo of that series that's coming up. Emily will be sending that out. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.